So I wanted to talk about the difference between science and religion. Of course, there's multiple versions of science and multiple versions of religion. There's two types of religion. One that you just follow, without question, like a little child. Of course, a lot of religions are taught that way. But a true religion, truth, anything true, can be dug into and investigated and questioned and reasoned and rethought and understood. For instance, the Bible has many questions, right? The Quran has many questions. One type of version of that religion would say, don't question anything that the text says or the imam says or the priest says or the pastor says. And another type of religion is open to questions, and truth is open to questions. So if you belong to a religious group and they don't allow questioning, you probably belong to what I would refer to as a cult. That you can't know the knowledge unless it's given to you by the upper echelon of esoteric, the elite. And the elite usually have two books, one for the masses and one for the elite, the secrets, right? So the Bible itself is the book for Christians, and there's no other book for Christians. If there is another book for Christians and it disagrees with it, that would be the definition of a cult. If you want to say that the Book of Mormon is another testament of Christ, and they come to your door and they say, based on the two witnesses that they present, that you should accept it as truth. Well, nothing should be accepted as truth based on people saying it's true. It should always be an investigated process to understand truth. If Joseph Smith wrote one book, and only Joseph Smith wrote that one book, that would be one witness, just one. So based on their own testimony, you should disregard it. The Bible was written by about 40 different authors, maybe 41 or so or more. And based on that, you shouldn't accept it as truth either. It should be established with other, evidences like history and even science and even in the internal question, you say, is this the truth? Well, and it's kind of dangerous to use that because what is true for you isn't necessarily truth. You might think, well, it's true because I like it or I want it. Well, that's not a that's not good enough evidence. So you have to rely on other things. The science is the same way. Science actually is a cult in many respects, especially when it involves questions about origins and things that are unknown, like, let's say, black holes and the interior of the Earth. Like, we've never been to the interior of the Earth, right? So we don't know. But I was just watching Bill Nye the Science Guy. It's now on Netflix if you want to watch. First episode, he says, and I quote, "How do we know what's under the crust of the Earth? Well, because there's volcanoes." Now, a cult would demand that you don't argue that or even try to reason that. But if you listen to that, it's circular reasoning. The core of the Earth has magma and something, else that we don't know because there's a volcano. Well, do you have to disregard that there are springs of water shooting out of the Earth in order to accept the fact? No, you don't, because all you have to do is not think about things like that. So there's always maybe two, at least, considerations. And when somebody in science presents an argument, most people don't question it. They say that the Earth's crust is this little thin thing, and everything underneath it is magma. Now, if you believe in global warming, shouldn't it start from the interior of the Earth too? Maybe the external, and why hasn't the Earth's crust just, melted into the magma of the interior? Because there's too much snow on the Earth, or, the cooling, heating process. But the real question is, just because there's heat and volcanoes shooting out of the Earth doesn't mean that there can't be water, because water shoots out of the Earth as well. So the real question is, why don't we question these things as they're given to us? They say, how do we know? And if you listen to every time they say, how do we know in science, it always boils down to one guy thought this and we all agree with him. How dangerous is that? Well, in science, it's not, because science is wrong 99% of the time, and then they just correct their beliefs. Ooh, beliefs. Dangerous to believe in science. It's an evidence to say that the magma of the Earth comes out, but it's an argument to say that there is magma. Now, we know that there are volcanoes. These are facts. And we know that magma or lava shoots out of these volcanoes, but not all the time. Sometimes it's steam. Mount St. Helens wasn't a magma eruption or filled with lava. It was heat, and that heat had a lot of steam in it. So is it a mixture? Well, I'm not here to define what's in the center of the Earth, but if the entire core of the Earth is made up of heat, then we have an even more dangerous situation on our hands, to where we could just melt into the Earth. The origin of the Earth, to say that we know how old the Earth is because we date rocks, that's stupid. I mean, just because you date a rock doesn't mean you know the date of the Earth. For instance, what if the entire Earth recycles itself and we only have the rocks that are 3 billion years old? Well, what if the Earth is 100 trillion years old and it's been recycled 150 times or something like that? We have no way of knowing. But to take the idea that we can carbon date, or uranium date, or some isotope, and that will tell us the origin of a rock, that's ludicrous as well, because we have so many experiments that have proven that there are radioactive isotopes with half-lives of less than 0.6 seconds, and they're in the middle of a rock, and we just say, well, yeah. If we go by history, we're going to look at history differently if we have to do a historical discovery based on chemistry or biology, in dead things, or a rock or something like that. The makeup of a rock doesn't tell us when. It doesn't. What we can know is that there's carbon in almost everything. And if carbon exists, then that's an argument to say, how long can carbon exist? Can carbon keep recycling? No, it has a half-life. So how can carbon exist if the age of the Earth is more than 4 billion years old? These are two diametrically opposed ideas, because you have evidence that says, well, we have evidence that says this, but history and other science says, no, that can't be true. And here's what science does. We say, well, as long as it can agree with our other theories that line up. And what you end up doing is chaining details. Now, there's a psychosis for this, right? You chain a detail in order to make your truth, right? There is a ghost in my house because I heard a noise. Well, it's a chain, and it's also circular reasoning. So there's so many circular reasons to believe in what they believe. Like, because there's volcanoes, there's magma in there. Well, that's just stupid. Well, volcanoes have lava, and lava comes from somewhere. Does it mean that the entire interior of the earth is made of lava? No, that's just absolutely stupid. The only way we can know this for sure is to dig down. And we dig down, what do we get? We get water everywhere we go. Now, unless you're in the path of a volcano, you might dig down and get heat. Now, how do we explain this? Well, maybe there's both. Maybe there's water and pockets of water and pockets of lava, or I don't know. The only way we can know is to dig down and see it. The lady who theorized the core of the earth just recently had her birthday on Google. I saw it. I forget the name. It was a couple of days ago, and this was in the 1800s. And I guess they were using seismology and graphs to show, well, because the waves go a certain way, and we can tell that what happens when it gets there, that it's lava. Well, what if it's jellyfish? I mean, just because you see a volcano doesn't mean that's the core. Just like, if you have a zit on your face and you pop it, oh, does that mean the entire interior is made of pus? No, there's bones and organs and, different, biological systems like blood and all this stuff. Maybe there's a whole network of stuff that we've never seen. And that's why Jules Verne, theorized that there could be a whole population of people and creatures under the core of the earth. Well, not that I believe in that, because I only believe in what I've actually investigated and what you can see. And how can I be somebody who's religious? Well, I'm not exactly religious to that point. I believe in things because I've investigated them. And I have found the claims in the Bible to be so true that it is scary. And sometimes I wish I didn't believe this. But there's so much I know and so much I understand about the Bible. It scares me because these facts are so true, and you can investigate them, and you can keep questioning them, and they come back to answer true. Think about this, for instance. 100 years ago, there were, let's say, 5,000 questionable items in the Bible that we were like, oh, that's just nonsense. Well, come to find out, they're historically true, they're scientifically true, and we were wrong to say that they were false or questionable. Now, I've investigated so many questions. I have friends that are skeptics, a lot of friends that are skeptics, and they question me all the time. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And the difference between me and them, I guess, is I've never assumed that they're right. So when they present me with an argument, they'll say, for instance, Matthew said that Jesus, to fulfill the prophecies, will be a Nazarite or a Nazarene. And where does that come from? That's not any prophecy book. Well, actually it is. I mean, so I did my own investigation, and I found in the book of Judges, when God was setting up the judges, he said, in order for anyone to be a rescuer or a savior of my people, he must or they must be a Nazarite or a Nazarene. And that means you have to take a vow. And that probably means that Jesus shaved his head at the beginning of his ministry. And we always have pictures of Jesus, with long hair and a beard, and, he doesn't look Jewish at all, and he's always skinny. And, I'm thinking, I don't think this is the Jesus of the Bible, because they called him a glutton, right? How could you be called a glutton and have a six-pack? It doesn't make sense. He was probably a big guy. He was probably not that great looking, but when he spoke, I don't know anybody alive that could speak and gather a crowd like that, just out of nowhere. He was obviously doing things that were mind-boggling. And how can you know that? Well, the only evidence that you have is the fact that there were so many believers immediately. History records it. They were dying for their beliefs. Now, I don't know about the Mormons, but, you can easily believe that Joseph Smith wrote this book and he was true. But he didn't do anything special. He wasn't healing people. He wasn't doing all this stuff. So to follow a man, to me, is just eventually you're going to run into stupidity, right? It's blind leading the blind. You got a man that comes up and he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and you're like, what? You're not the way, the truth, and the life, because that's nonsense. And then he heals you, or he performs some crazy miracle and you witness it. Well, you're going to believe it because you were there, and you're going to convince everybody that you were there by telling them, look at what happened, this is what happened. And that's how you gain followers. You don't gain followers if you have to convince one person after another. David Koresh, for instance, what do you have, like 200 or 300 followers? Jesus had 5,000 people that he fed, according to the text. Well, you can't know that for certain, but what you can know is that he convinced so many people that he was put to death because he was claiming to be God. And we know this, like that was another skeptical question. Jesus never claims to be God. Maybe God is a woman. Well, Jesus was not a woman. There was no historical evidence to say Jesus was a woman. God's not a woman. Here the what is it? The Shema is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And when Jesus claims to be God, the high priest tears his robes. And in the law, the high priest can only tear his robes for one reason. Now, the other priests can tear their robes for, you said baloney and I said, balagna. Well, how dare you argue with me? But the high priest can only rend his clothes, his priestly garment, when there's blasphemy involved. And blasphemy always tries to rob God of his glory. You can't rob God of his glory if you're claiming to be God and you are God. Well, you can if you're not God. And that's basically what Caiaphas thought was, you're not God, how dare you kill this guy, he's disrespecting our beliefs and our whole system. Well, none of that, it's a big long, chain again. Forget it all, because the only evidence that we have today, because we can't see the miracles that he performed, is the only evidence that we have is that there are believers in the world, and they multiplied so quickly during the first, second century. And history tells us, you can't deny it, there were crusades. We didn't make up this religion in the 1200s, which was an argument they tried to push in the 60s, well before the evidence of the Dead Sea Scrolls was released. And the Dead Sea Scrolls were 200 years before Christ. So how could you have prophecy about a Christ, we have prophecy that was fulfilled today through the return of Israel coming to their lack of punishment, let's say. They were scattered amongst the people, which was a prophecy, and that was true. And people say, well, just, big deal. But then they came back. Well, in 1917, they tried to make this proclamation that Israel deserved to have its country, just like I'm sure the Palestinians or Philistines. Well, I don't know why we changed the name of Palestine to, today, but they are Philistines. You hear them pronounce their own people group in their language, it's Philistine. And people today don't understand that they've been at war with these people since David and Goliath, since, before that. And the conflict will not end according to Scripture. So all you have to do is make it end. Well, then I could believe it, that it's false. But there's too many historical evidences and current events. And, the text in the Bible keeps proving itself to be right. Let's take science, for instance, now. Compare that. Well, how many times has science been told it was wrong and it proved itself right? No. It's the complete opposite when you talk about science. Science has been wrong more times, and they've had to adjust it and fix their answer. Everybody knows about the medical belief that garbage was creating the disease, and then they found out, no, it's the rats that were causing typhus, and then they were like, no, it's the bugs and the fleas on the rats, and you get the flea and they bite you or whatever. Now you have typhoid. Well, with man's knowledge, you always have to start. Well, is this right? How about this? Maybe. And maybe you're right at the beginning. Maybe you get lucky. But science has been wrong more times and had to correct their beliefs and theories and facts, right? A scientific fact is something I can prove. There's lava in the middle of the earth because there's volcanoes. That's not a fact. That's just an evidence. And evidence doesn't always lead to what you're saying is true. It is a factor, right? But, math is the only true science that's purely true. And, you try to mix beliefs and desires into that. We call that statistics. Well, I can make a statistic say anything I want to, as long as I only present the right amount of evidence to support that theory. And don't talk about how it's circular reasoning or, I'm using a constant to make this equation work. Well, guess what? There's always a way to make true, like 1 + 1 = 2, into something a little shady. If 1 is not 1, but it is 1, and yet it's 1 or less than 1 and -1, and it's plus the -1 plus the, it's probably likely that it equals 2. Well, see, I'm introducing a lot of micro chains in order to make it true. So the more chains you have, the more probability it's hogwash. Doesn't necessarily mean it's hogwash, but it does in majority of senses, especially when you have to, for instance, if you have an astronomy degree, from 1980, almost everything you know about the universe is false. And you have to go back and relearn. Well, that's not true, and the dates are different, and the distances are different, and all this stuff. And how do we know that redshift, blue shift details exactly the position of the planets? And when we went to Mars, we were off by so many things. And P87, we tried to land on that, we were wrong by a couple of miles. And so the calculus was correct. You get the orbits right as long as you have the particular details and distances correct, and the arcs of their rotations and orbits and such. But you get one tiny little thing wrong, and you extrapolate. Now we're way off for here, and that's science. Truth, on the other hand, it says this is true, and it's not like, well, it's kind of true. Then it's not truth. Solomon says that ultimate truth does not contain a lie. So if there's a lie in your religion, it's not true. If the Jaredites and the Lamanites aren't true, they didn't exist, that Joseph Smith made them up, they're not related to the Hebrews, which they proved genetically, that there is no genetic, Native American that shares the mitochondrial DNA with the Hebrew, then guess what? He's got a lie, and he made parts of that up. And was all of it wrong? Yes, all of it must be wrong because he lied here, 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 and here. And if he lied here, 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 and here, just because he was right about one little thing, like love your neighbor, doesn't mean that you should keep it, because ultimate truth does not contain a lie. Now, you can find truths in ultimate lies, I'm sure, but it's not a good thing to devote your life to something that's mainly filled with lies and some truth. That's kind of contradictory to me. And I know people continue to do that. Even they go to a church and I don't really believe it, but it's a nice thing and it makes my family happy. And I'm like, what? Just get out of here. If you believe that's not really true, you're a liar yourself, because you're accepting it. So let me end this with challenging any of you that really have difficulties in understanding like contradictions in Scripture. And I want to challenge you, first of all, to try to figure it out yourself. Maybe you can Google it, but you can run into a lot of problems with that, because man can lead you down the wrong path. Just like I could lead you down the wrong path. I could be mistaken about something that I believe. But everything that I've investigated in Scripture, every questionable thing, I've been to the Skeptics Annotated Bible and I've tried to answer every question. And with the skeptics, they a lot of times misinterpret details. They have reading comprehension problems. Believers, Christians, have this reading comprehension problem too. And they go down a path where they're like, well, that's what my teacher says. I know what the text says, but that doesn't make sense, so I'm just going to ignore that. And that's dangerous. To me, a true religion is following the historical facts and the text that's been given. Man has tried to manipulate the text, and there are a couple of translations that have tried to insert things that aren't really, in the original, and they don't agree with any of the original manuscripts. Like the King James Bible, there's a lot of items in there that don't agree. Children who are older than their fathers, and the mathematics don't work out, and these are historical fact records, and the older manuscripts say, no, that's not what it says this. So, and then they introduce texts that support their theological beliefs or whatnot. So, to me, the Bible is not just one translation. It's the original language, the manuscripts, plus some of the best translations in your language. And one of the problems that a lot of skeptics like to do is they argue the English, or whatever language that they speak. They argue the language text that it's been translated into without verifying if the original text has those similar problems. For instance, there was a class here about Intro to New Testament, and they asked, according to the text, what is true? And they meant specifically the Oxford English Bible. Well, I've read the Oxford English Bible, and in so many places it's not even clear according to what the Greek said, and it's much better in other translations. Does that mean the other translations are right? No, it doesn't. What I'm saying is look at the argument first, and then say, yeah, that's a questionable argument, and then do your investigation and look up the original text. There's tools online that say, here's the word, here's the definition. You don't have to speak or read Hebrew or Greek or whatever, but eventually you can learn. It's actually pretty easy after you've been doing it for a while to start reading the Greek. So you take that, and then you make sure you don't have a misinterpretation of the text, right? So here, let me give you an example. In the book of Ezra and in the book of Nehemiah, we're given one of these contradictory issues. Ezra lists families and people and numbers of people from those groups who returned to Israel after the Babylonian exile. Now, if you don't know what the Babylonian exile is, you better start there, because almost all of current prophetic, history leads up from that point, and prophecies start from that point. So the Israel becoming a nation in 1948, that's given in Ezekiel 4. You got to go to Ezekiel 4, subtract the Babylonian exile date, and then multiply it by Leviticus 28 or 26:18, which says that they will be punished sevenfold, which is a 2,520 year prophecy. Beginning in 1571, you get, or 571, not 1571, 571, you subtract that from 2520, which is the easiest way to get to the Julian calendar, and you get 1949, and you have to subtract one for the year zero because it didn't exist, and you get 1948. Here's a 2,500-year-old prophecy or more, given in 571 BC. And it is fulfilled. Well, he didn't say exactly what would be fulfilled, but he said, your punishment will last that long. So what happens when their punishment is lifted? They get their country back. Coincidence? I think so. And it's too much of a coincidence that it happens on that year that their country was returned back to them. Daniel talks about how, when the Messiah comes and in the middle of the week he will be cut off and then the daily sacrifices will be put to an end. Well, none of the Jews who deny Christ consider this verse, because he says the Messiah will come and then the daily sacrifices will be cut off. Well, the daily sacrifice was cut off in 70 AD, right? And in the middle of that week, or middle of that 7, from 1 to 70 AD, the king came and he was cut off. He was 32, 33 years old, which is not exactly the perfect middle, but middle doesn't mean, exactly in the middle. So it didn't have to be when he turned 35, but 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, whatever. That's the middle. He was cut off, and the daily sacrifice was cut off, and that was, those were your evidences. But if you take that story and you apply it to the future, and you say, you have that 1/7 returned to you that they had a 7 in the first century with the Messiah, with Jesus, and then they had a 7 way before that was taken away from them and they were stuck in Babylon. And then you have now the 7, consider this, they began in 1948, that will end in 2018. That's the 7. And he says, in the middle of that 7, he, now at this point we're possibly referring to God, will make a treaty with many for 1/7, right? So there's your 7 from 1948. Here's your treaty to 2018. And in the middle of that 7, something will be returned to them. Something significant will happen. Obviously, the Messiah will come or whatever. Well, in history, in the middle, what did they do? They had the 6-day war. And then they received Jerusalem, the crowning capital of their country, right? Of their historically capital. So here you have the exact same markers. Jerusalem was given back to them. Now they don't have all of Israel, and I believe there's a promise that says that will all be returned. And there are also prophecies that will be healed and all this stuff. Now, misinterpretation can be, we're not necessarily talking about a worldly, historical, regular kind of event. What if we're talking about in the future when Christ comes down and sits in that seat and rules according to the promise? At the first part, he basically said he was going to die, but he said he was going to rule, and that's why Jews are confused, because Jesus, Yeshua didn't come down and rule. He came down and sacrificed himself. So that's why they refuse to believe in this Messiah. But the evidence shows that they should have believed in somebody right around that time, because the daily sacrifices were cut off in 70 AD, which is the marker to show that the Messiah came before this. So if you're Jewish, I'm sorry to throw these big things at you. Write me. I'd be glad to go through your study. If you want to just ridicule me or whatever, that's fine. I'm going to leave up all the comments to this, and I pray that you do deep study. Christians, don't answer skeptics in the chat. Don't. It's just stupid. Get one-on-one with these people. Let them see what you're like for real. The depth of your knowledge as compared to the depth of theirs, and maybe the depth of your knowledge is like that big as a Christian, and you're trying to answer these skeptics that have a mountain of knowledge, and you look like a complete idiot. No offense. So raise the bar and look at their side. Show them that you're willing to investigate everything that they have considered, and that you have another thing. Instead of lava, what about the waters and the springs that shoot up? And Old Faithful, where is that coming from? How do you consider that it's all lava when there's evidences for other things to be thrown in there? And as long as science, well, what did Napoleon say? People will believe anything as long as it's not in the Word of God or the Bible. I think he said Bible. So I'll see you later. This is Tong Sao signing out for now. Bye.